Next up is our panel on the cannabis industry. And your moderator will be none other than myself. And I'll explain why I'm moderating this panel. I work at an agency called Diff. We create e-commerce experiences. And 20% of our business last year was building these e-commerce experiences for the Canadian cannabis industry. One of the speaking opportunities that I've taken this year has been talking about designing and prohibition and being a UX pioneer in the cannabis space. It's been a challenging yet exciting industry, and I think that's one of the key things that we find in cannabis, especially in Canada. It's also been quite an exciting topic around the world, and most of our executive team has traveled from the west coast of North America all the way to Europe to talk about our involvement in this exciting space. In this panel today, we're going to take a look at how innovative firms are at the forefront of creative, quote unquote, creative branding and innovation in this budding cannabis industry by redefining the market and bringing revolutionary products and services to consumers in Canada and around the world. What I'm going to do is start by introducing our panel. They're going to take the stage. I'll give you a little bit about them, but I won't talk about myself other than what I've already said. First, let's call out Brandi Leifso to the stage. Brandi is from Evio Beauty. It was created with a vision to break stigmas, to create a more conscious future, but products that are good for your skin and your planet. She's made some partnerships with Aurora Cannabis, among others, and I'll give you a few minutes to talk about yourself once we have everybody upstairs. A round of applause for Brandi, everybody. Next on the panel, we have Charles Bern from Patio Interactive. There's Charles, wonderful. Patio Interactive is a design and development agency specializing in technology-driven business solutions. And Charles has worked with a number of licensed producers, and he'll be able to share some stories around that. Welcome, Charles, to the stage, everyone. Next, I'll call up Kirsten Gauthier, Chief Marketing Officer of 48 North. Kirsten is an entrepreneur and creative thinker with over 20 years of award-winning experience. Has been recognized by Print Magazine as one of Canada's 50 most influential people in graphic communications. Round of applause for Kirsten Gauthier, everyone. And last but not least, Gorzkowski, Director of International Relations at Ample Organics, a seed-to-sale company that specializes in the cannabis space with partnerships around the world. Please welcome Gorzkowski to the stage. He'll tell you more about his specifics. I did a panel last month at another conference, and we really talked about how restrictive the industry is. And I definitely don't want to dance around that topic. I think most of you that know about the regulations related to recreational cannabis know that you probably can't name more than one or two brands. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we have. And the newest regulations coming up that we're going to talk about, of course, are that this fall the government is bringing on board and legalizing edibles and topicals. Is there more than that? That's the big one, right? Those are the big.
Concentrates.
And concentrates, right, which would be involved in topicals. So there's a lot of new things changing. And the thing about this industry is it's regulated by the federal government is the law changes a lot. It changes regularly, and there are so many companies that are involved that are trying to push the boundaries of that law that we really need to either decide to lead or follow. But before we get into this complex topic, what I want to do is give everyone a few minutes at least to talk about what your company does, what your role is in involvement in that company, and then how does your company relate to the cannabis industry? Because we have a conglomerate of people from different sides of the coin here. So we're going to start with you, Charles. Tell us about what you do, your company does, and your involvement in the cannabis industry.
Yeah, so I'm a co-founder of XR Canna and partner in Patio Interactive. You can play with some of our toys at the back. We are a design and development company. We, like many tech companies, got sucked into the cannabis space about 2 years ago. It's been a good space for us because we work with a lot of disruptive technology. We try to really push the boundaries of tech and design thinking. And the cannabis space has been great to us because they have a threshold for innovation. They're looking for ways to adapt to the ever-changing regulations. And they also have money, which helps. So we've been able to build some products and create some really unique solutions for a number of different LPs and other peripheral companies in the industry.
Wonderful. Kirsten.
So I work for 48 North. We are a licensed producer of cannabis located here in Ontario. We have 3 facilities, one of which is in Northern Ontario. We have another indoor facility in Brant County, and pending Health Canada's approval, we'll be one of the largest outdoor grows of sun-grown cannabis in the world. So I'm Chief Marketing Officer there, though I'd like to think that we're technologically savvy and on the cutting edge. I think for most LPs, we're just really trying to keep our head above water and build a business that's going to last. So the fundamentals of cultivation, business practice, human resources, and staying on top of regulations has been really top of mind for us. But now we're beginning to mature a little bit and beginning to adopt more technology that's existing out there, and probably looking to change it or tweak it a bit to suit our own realities of how regulated our world is.
Thanks, Kirsten. And on to you, Greg, your company, what you do, and how are you related to cannabis, personally and professionally?
Very related to cannabis, for sure. So I'm from Ample Organics. For those of you who don't know, which I imagine is most of you, Ample Organics is a seed-to-sale company. Essentially what that means is we help licensed producers here in Canada and around the world track all of their cultivation and sales, literally from the time they plant the seed until they sell it to the end user. We then take all this data and help them report that information to the regulators, Health Canada here in Canada. So at Ample, I am the director of international. So I essentially take our platform and try and get us all over the world. It's very difficult, but it's a lot of fun.
And are you able to speak about your previous job working in the cannabis industry as well?
Yeah, for sure. So this is actually where I met Matt. Formerly, I was at Shopify, where I was one of the founding members of the cannabis team over there. So we started about 2.5 years ago. Quickly went to support a lot of the licensed producers in the area and even some of the provinces. So the OCS here in Ontario, BC LDB, Newfoundland PI. My prime responsibility there was really making sure all these retail operations were set up properly and could launch on October 17th, all of which did. Matt was actually a big help on that.
100,000 transactions in the first 24 hours, Greg. That's what we did in the websites that I designed. Brandi, over to you. Tell me a little bit about what you do, who your company is, and how you're involved in cannabis space now and maybe later.
Yeah, so hey, I'm Brandi, and I'm the founder of EVO Beauty, and we are a conscious lifestyle brand that houses EVO Beauty, EVO Skin, and EVO Community. And we got into the cannabis space about 2.5 years ago as well, and I recognized that cannabis was capable of helping us on our mission, and our mission is to create a more conscious future. And with the help of cannabis, we are able to eliminate the use of animal byproducts, reduce the use of plastic, and create more transparency in the green beauty space. Green beauty, ironically enough, has almost no regulations. So taking some precedence from a heavily regulated industry has been really helpful to our consumers. And so we're helping create that precedence from a regulatory, from an industry with a lot of regulatory to an industry that doesn't have it, and further our mission to create a more conscious future. We also almost a year ago, we were partially acquired by Aurora. So we are Aurora's beauty arm exclusively, globally. And so we've created EVO Skin, which is a cannabis sativa seed, which essentially is just a fancy word for hemp. So we created a skincare line with that. And then we also are creating a CBD skincare line, as well as have some clinical trials and studies underway to really understand the effects of CBD on your skin. And those will be available through the very heavily regulated industry, through dispensaries and other legal means. Yeah.
So I want to stay with you, Brandi, because you mentioned 2 things here. You have a product that is actually legal right now because is made with hemp seed.
Yes.
And then you're also partnering with Aurora to create a regulated product in the recreational space. How has that changed or evolved your brand strategy or your creative vision of the company, or has it influenced it or not at all, perhaps?
It hasn't at all, to be honest, just because it's not that we got into the cannabis industry, it's that cannabis was capable of furthering our mission. So if lavender could reduce the use of plastic, create more transparency in the beauty space, and eliminate animal byproducts, the company wouldn't be as hot as it is right now, because lavender just isn't as hot of an ingredient. It's not an up and coming new industry. So we didn't pivot or change our marketing plan whatsoever. It just so happened that cannabis could be a tool in our tool belt to help further our mission. So our mission, our navigation, our marketing plans, nothing has really changed. Although now we just have, we have things that we have to follow and control because it is cannabis. But in terms of the line that's legal on the market, EVO Skin, that's actually launching next month, and it's just like the launch of any other product, except for we have the help now of the excitement of the cannabis space. The regulatory portion of it with EVO Skin Plus, that's a whole different mission, but same mission, just whole different adventure, I should say, to get that to market. But we really believe on leaning on people whom are the best at what they do, and so we don't try to figure that out. We lean on our partners at Aurora for that.
I'm sure you do. Yes. All right. So let's roll back to Charles here. So my question is really about digital channels. So when you think about your own brand strategy and maybe the pivoting of your company into this XR Canna space, how important is digital in the way that you run your business and the way that you've approached that space?
Well, I mean, we're a digitally focused company, and what we try to do with our clients is help them embrace some of the new technology that we're doing. And so, we live and breathe it ourselves, and we try to disseminate some of that technology, just like all the exhibitors here today. On it's very forward thinking. So we're looking for use cases, and I mean the cannabis industry is a very specific industry where because of the regulations and that are changing, but also the mentality of beg for forgiveness, not for permission, and looking at ways to differentiate themselves. There's a million different brands out and almost 200 LPs in Canada. They all sort of are starting their rec experience from almost zero. So they're soulless to start, but they're looking for really unique ways to use technology. And there's also less legacy costs there. So digital is something that moves slowly over time unless you hit some sort of critical mass. But companies are, it costs money and it requires innovation. So it's been a great industry for us to be able to say, oh, you're not starting from anything. You can leapfrog technology. You're going directly to something that is here today that's useful instead of going from a landline.
So you don't have there's no legacy system that you're moving from, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and just the modes of thinking in the industry is really refreshing because we're trying to evangelize the power of the technology, and now we found an industry that's really saying, yeah, we're into it.
Well, because how else can you accelerate into an industry without now jumping on board with all of the technology that's out there? Now, are you faced with any digital restrictions when you try to implement what you're doing for LPs?
We're constantly keeping an eye on that, and we know that the industry's full of loopholes and Tweed. You couldn't advertise, but then Tweed partnered with Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and they were on the taxis, right? It's like they're telling people not to use their product, but they're advertising their product and telling people not to use it. It's like, it was well played. And so on the digital side too, we're looking at how, we can't show buds and you can't let people handle them, but you can let them see them in virtual form. And as of now, that's legal, and maybe tomorrow it won't be. But digital channels right now are far less regulated, especially because you can age gate. So the rule now is that you can pretty much say a lot of different things as long as they say they're 18 or 19. So that's just the way it works.
So you're heavily building age gates into all of your space. So that's how it's influenced the way you do your business for cannabis specifically, is your age gating. And experiential stuff, are there physical, is it somebody producing a physical ID, or is it just saying, yeah, of course?
As of now, the regulations are the same as the internet. Yeah, I'm 18, I'm 19. We want to be responsible about it, but it's the same with most adult websites. So,
So that's a good segue over to Kirsten. I'm sure that your
Adult websites?
Your adult website. Your adult website is age gated, I'm assuming, and if it isn't, you probably should call your IT person right now. What in your strategy for trying to create quote unquote a brand strategy, how does digital play a role, or how important are digital channels in the everyday life of your cannabis company?
Well, digital is really one of the most important places for us to play, not only because that's basically where everyone spends all of their time, but it is the one channel that we may have more freedom and of expression than others. For 48 North, we consciously decided that we would build a platform and start building a community and take it slow. We knew that a lot of LPs would come out with tons of different brands and show up in whatever way we were allowed to show up, but really they were meaningless to most people. I think now if you go into any dispensary, no one really knows what they're buying. They just want to get weed. So I'm not sure if that was money well spent. I know for us, having taken the time to build a platform, or it's called Latitude, and a community, and doing it in a meaningful way, in an authentic way, we now have brand ambassadors, and we have an audience waiting to buy our product, waiting to hear about our product, and waiting to socialize our product. So digital, in that case, has been very meaningful for us, and will continue to be. Now that we're sort of getting into a mature state in marketing, we're now looking at CRM very, very seriously as being a big part of our strategy and talking to our people. We all know how difficult it's been to get analytics and understand our customers, and now that we know that the provinces are going to hold on to that data pretty tightly. They're not going to share it. It's up to us to really understand who our people are and what they want, and that will allow us to know what kind of products to make and what to bring to market.
And you have to build that data lake yourself with people.
That's right.
Right. And I think that's been I'm going to pivot the question and then ask the same one to you, Greg, because this is something I heard a couple days ago in a meeting I had, was that in the cannabis industry today, we're seeing spending unlike anything that's ever happened in any industry, even more than the massive beer wars that have happened in the past. Are you seeing that, Kirsten?
Do you know what? My budget was $900,000 last year. And I know that a lot of the larger LPs spent $15, $30, $100 million last year. And I would say that what we were able to do by concentrating on one channel and one community and delivering authenticity, I feel like we're in a pretty good position to launch to consumer market and be successful. So
you've concentrated your priorities and you think you'll have a better rate of return?
I think so. I don't think anyone knew how to measure it. And I think it was like, oh my God, the rules are going to change. Let's just blow a bunch of money and let's see what sticks, right? And I don't think that ever works.
Hope is not a strategy.
That's right.
Right? Also, because no one from Leafly or Lift & Co. is here, we can also say that they hold a lot of data that would be very valuable to everyone. And LPs and a lot of companies are spending millions of dollars on them. Are you involved in that spending game, or did you have something to say about that too, Charles?
I'm sure Ample has some nice data as well.
What do you have to say, Ample?
All right, Greg, let's talk about your, you are a digital company.
Yeah. Yes.
So it'll slightly pivot to this conversation. Digital channels play an integral part in your business, but what about the to the conversation that we've had here about related to LPs and what have you seen work and stick, and what have you observed in the industry a little bit of digital? How a role digital plays?
Yeah, and I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head really with talking about building a brand and having brand ambassadors in such a tightly regulated marketing framework. There's not a lot you can do. You can't post Instagram ads. You can't have Facebook ads. We saw billboards for a month before all those got taken down. You have to really do kind of a grassroots approach. And 48 North's done a fantastic job. I can think of a few other LPs that have done a really good job. And I can think of a few LPs that have done a really good job in just getting this community of not employees, but passionate cannabis users that say, this is a great product. And that's sort of the second part of how you win. It's with your product. And while, we see shortages throughout the country and actually around the world right now, there is supply, but there's not quality supply, and there's not the supply that the actual public is demanding. So it's, good brand ambassadors, great product, and your product sells itself.
And over to you, Brandi, because you kind of took a side door into being able to create a brand. If you were a pure cannabis company, you would be under the same issue, facing the same issues that most of us have in our industry. I'll ask you the same question about digital channels. Like, I'm sure from your hemp product line, there hasn't been much of a change versus any consumer packaged good company out there. But as you approach this potential with your what is it, the Plus product, are you pivoting your strategy? Are you changing the way you're approaching this?
No, in fact, quite the opposite. I think that's actually a strategy amongst some LPs as well, that they're able to utilize these companies that are up and coming with authentic followers to be able to market them without marketing them. And so that's where a lot of the market spend is going as well. I know that was part of Aurora's strategic investment into EVO, is that we can market them without marketing them, if that makes any sense.
It makes total sense to me. I hope everyone else gets that.
All of our products are, for example, I think I've mentioned their names at least a dozen times already. You now know Aurora, if you didn't already, but I am not Aurora. So I think that there's strategy within that as well. And that also leads into the digital space too, because beauty, for example, is the number one watch thing on the internet, period, on social media aspects. So it's the number one watch thing on Instagram. It's the number one watch thing on YouTube, minus the toy tutorials, which aren't really the cannabis demographic. So there's a lot of leverage for us to be able to utilize in the digital space to be able to sell these products and also to create an authentic following, and we don't have those kinds of restrictions that cannabis companies have. But it's EVO Skin powered by Aurora, and it's Aurora certified, and Aurora's certified stamp is on it, and it has a statement as to what that means on it. And so that's a way to kind of get through some of those loopholes. And it also then, in turn for us, provides that transparency to the consumer. So our consumer in the beauty space is actually looking for that. They want to know, where were these ingredients grown? Not just the cannabis ingredient, but it's actually harder for us to get that kind of knowledge from any other ingredient base. But from cannabis, we can, because it's so heavily regulated. So the digital space really plays to us being able to use Instagram, we have an amazing influencer program that actually Shabby, who's here, runs, and she does a phenomenal job with it. And that then, because cannabis is such a hot thing right now, people on Instagram and our influencers are speaking more and more about that. So it's kind of a way to utilize digital through loopholes that cannabis has to pertain to. Yeah.
I really want to, which is that's fantastic, by the way, and I think that's really a topic I want to stay on, which is loopholes. And you are a loophole, and I want to talk about loopholes with everyone else, because as we approach legalization of probably the most popular products this fall. For those of you that aren't familiar with the industry, dried flower has the least margin of profitability than any other product. It's like selling a bag of flour versus a loaf of bread. And I think what we all, as every LP that I speak to, every person in this industry I speak to says, once edibles hits the market, it's a game changer. Not only for the fact that the profitability and the margins are there and the products are going to be more cool, but there's a loophole in that you can actually partner with companies like yourself and create a buzz in a brand that you could never do if you called it Aurora Skincare. You could never do that. Greg, what have you been seeing with product innovation and some, you don't have to say names, you could just talk about things that you've seen where products are really getting innovated and this creative loopholing is happening quite regularly.
I've seen some amazing stuff over the past 3-4 years, and I know Hexo out of Quebec has done some pretty interesting stuff with like meth sprays.
It's my branded pen right now. It says Hexo on it, by the way.
Aurora had a really interesting keef product that came out, I think it was late last year. So you see a lot, and it's really, how can you innovate on a product that's so strictly regulated? And yeah, come, anticipated October 17th of this year, when we start to introduce edibles and topicals and concentrates, we're going to see a flurry of innovation. It's already starting now. In various facilities around the country. They're experimenting, they're trying stuff out. Everyone's putting a large bet on cannabis beverages. Whether that's going to pan out or not, I'm not too sure. I'm not into it personally, but we'll see what happens. And yeah, it's almost too early to say what the most interesting innovation is going to be. I don't think we've seen it yet. But what I can say is, Canada's place in the global cannabis industry is going to come from that specific innovation, and how we keep our position at the top of the cannabis food chain is by creating this very interesting IP. So I think the next couple of years is going to be very important for the long-term success of Canada in the market.
It is Ample set up to support that expansion of the market into these new products.
Yes.
Good. That's a one good one. Of course, one word answer. Now, Kirsten, I'm not sure how much you can share as far as product innovation is concerned. But are you looking at partnerships with companies such as beauty products or edibles? Have you made some that have been announced that you can talk about? What can you tell us about product innovation and if there's any sort of technology involved there?
Yeah, well, I can certainly talk about two partnerships that we announced, one of which is a company out of Colorado called Mother and Clone. They have a nanospray technology. It's sublingual. It activates after 60 seconds and gone in an hour. I think that will be quite an interesting, innovative product for the Canadians. And the next one isn't so much innovative, but it is the #1 selling product, which is vape pens. The differentiator is that it is a single strain extraction, and all the terpenes are intact. So all partnerships that we would look to make and grow with do have to satisfy a few things that we as a company stand for, which is sustainability, values, strong values, and stigma busting. So we do choose partnerships around those. I can't talk about anything else.
No.
I want one of those vape pens.
Okay.
Okay. And over to you, Charles. Similar question. What's your status in there?
So I guess we're in the moonshine era of cannabis.
Absolutely.
And even we don't need a lot of data to know that most of the consumers, they've tried the flower, they've smoked a joint, they've burned it, or maybe they've vaped it. But the sheer mass of products that are coming down the pipeline for your dogs, for your grandmother, for everything, and in all these derivative forms, and then communicating that, both a lot of what we're doing is helping educate people in the LPs about how this is going to be, because they're all industry switchers. So they didn't work in cannabis unless they were drug dealers until most of them haven't been in the industry more than 6 months. And so they came from General Mills or somewhere else. So getting them to understand all the different science and then the value proposition of what terpenes are and single strain and all these things, and then communicating that both internally and helping them innovate, and then as well with customers, so that you go from moonshine to, if somebody passes you a joint and you're like, well, what is this? What's weed? It's like people wouldn't say, give me a glass of alcohol. That would sound super weird. But that's sort of where we are with this. And then we want to be educating our consumers, educating the people selling it as well too, to understand all the different things that are coming down the pipeline, and it's just going to get more and more crazy.
Did you just compare dried flower to 100% proof or 200 proof alcohol?
In terms of just that, it's like you wouldn't call it that. You would want to know the strain, you want to know the lineage, you want to know where it came from, and that's just the flower. Then there's the oils and how you're ingesting it and the differences in your body. That's why they call it experimenting with drugs.
Now, I'm sure most of you on the panel are would love to get the data to know who's buying your product and is it noobs? Is it experienced people? And I think that's the bigger challenge, is building that brand awareness without the ability to advertise. Before I get into that question, I think one of the things that I've seen already since prior to legalization and legalization is acquisitions. And the fact that the market, you said there's 200 LPs, they're all fighting for a piece of this big pie that people think is a big pie, but we're not too sure how big this pie is. The question for you, Greg, like what have you seen? What have you seen? One of my clients just bought Up, and now they're Hexo Up or whatever they're going to be called. What else is happening? I'm not even following it. And do you think that's going to change the way that we perceive brands in the cannabis space?
So, I mean, it's funny you mentioned Up was the first cannabis company I ever worked with, way back in the day, when they were before they were even a license holder. Yeah, that acquisition was very, very cool news, personally for me. I mean, I have Google alerts set up for M&A in the cannabis space, and it lights up all day, every day. And there's always somebody buying somebody, someone joint venture with somebody, and it's almost hard to follow who owns who. Through some acquisition, you might accidentally own 10% of your biggest rival, and it's super hard to follow. I used to have this massive tree of who owns who, and it just got so complicated I had to throw it out. But it's. I think it's coming from a place where everyone's looking at the beverage alcohol space, and you look at beer specifically, and you have your Molson and you have your Budweiser, and everyone's trying to be the Molson, Budweiser, and I don't necessarily agree with that sentiment. I think there's room for quality, medium-sized producers, and this very close comparison to beverage alcohol, and I don't know. I think it's super interesting, at least, to see how all this is shaping out, and yeah, it's just super complicated.
Back to you, Brandi. You've talked about how your social channel strategy hasn't really changed with the cannabis focus. But what about advertising? The paid display ads, and any print ad strategy. You may not even be engaging in that for your non-cannabis specific product. Are you able to gain as much traction, or do you see yourself able to gain as much traction, or changing any of that in your brand strategy?
Yeah, so we absolutely do. We do we have great sponsored partnerships with Forbes, the Oprah team so we do print as well as various other things, the traditional kind of marketing aspect. Digital is a big part of it, just because that's where our consumers are. But we do a lot of traditional marketing as well. And none of that has changed. In fact, I think that part of the strategy that Aurora has had investing in us is that it doesn't change. That's also what a part of our ad value is to the cannabis space, is that it doesn't have to change. And so when it has to change is when it's EVO Skin Plus. As soon as we start putting CBD in it, or THC, or any of those kinds of active ingredients. And so the fun part about it is that it doesn't have to change now. And so we can go gun-ho on advertising right now with EVO Skin, and also with EVO Beauty, which inevitably feeds into EVO Skin. It's an entire ecosystem that continues to grow. And then when EVO Skin Plus hits, well, everyone already knows who EVO Skin is. And so it's done the advertising for us. So yes, we can't advertise EVO Skin Plus, but that gives us even more momentum to really go hard and aggressive on advertising prior to the infusion.
So the introduction of your regulated product is actually influencing your digital strategy now to be more aggressive.
More aggressive or not, whether we were doing an infused version or not, we would be aggressive on a new launch for sure, especially when the industry is so hot. So it's lending us a favor as well. Cannabis is so hot, so people are interested in it, but also keeping in mind that our consumer isn't necessarily the cannabis consumer. So for example, we are working with a very large subscription box out of the US, and about a year ago, they were super interested in cannabis. They knew that we were speaking to cannabis companies, and they knew that we were getting ready to launch a cannabis product in 2019, and they were super interested in it. They were engaged in it. Now that it's ready to go, we reached back out to them and said, hey, we are sending this to you. They had a PO in that was temporary that we were discussing, and now all of a sudden they said, you know what, we're actually really uncomfortable with the cannabis space. So let's switch to EVO Beauty, which is fantastic. But inevitably, then people have EVO Beauty top in mind. This is a 2.2 million piece order. And so 2.2 million people are going to have our product in their hands, although they're not comfortable with cannabis right now because our consumer and our buyers are still not comfortable with cannabis. But as society starts changing and it starts evolving, they're going to think of us top of mind in that space. And so then that automatically kind of grandfathers us into that cannabis position once cannabis and beauty become something that's more comfortable to non-cannabis consumers.
Very interesting. And I'll pivot over to Kirsten with a similar question about restrictive advertising. You don't have the opportunity to advertise as heavily as our friend from the beauty industry. What tactics have been most effective for you? Like, what are you concentrating your efforts on in digital channels or traditional channels?
Well, I think it's a combination of both. Like I said, like obviously digital is where we live most of the time, and then experiential will be a big part of that as well. Events. One of you were talking about loopholes earlier, and one that I always love to imagine the possibilities of is that we're actually allowed to show up in a cultural, scientific, educational, or I guess artistic way. And I think that we have a really big opportunity as LPs to help shape the culture of Canada in cannabis. And I don't see anybody doing that in a meaningful way. So that could be in lots of different forms. And beyond that, I mean, you have your traditional regulated marketing spaces, whether it's, bars or bathrooms or gambling facilities, but we're also seeing those types of places evolve as they're being challenged with bigger budgets and more creative campaigns and innovative products. So I expect those types of regulated advertising spaces to really change in the next year and a half as well.
So where are you getting the most traction? Describe it like an experiential campaign that's been working well for you.
Well, we haven't actually fully launched to consumer yet. So we have signed a deal with Quebec, which we will be delivering flower there this month. And as we all know, we're actually allowed to do no activity whatsoever in Quebec.
Zero, yeah.
You chose the best province.
That's the province, for those of you that aren't aware, Quebec restricts any merchandise, any naming. Your site will have to be restricted to Quebecers. They can't access it. Is that also one part of the deal?
No, I mean they can come see our site. No, that was not part of the deal. But we definitely cannot hold events. We can't promote. They will invite us to come to the store when they do so choose. But that's okay because they've only approved 10 LPs to sell in their province, and we're one of them. So we don't really have to worry about selling. They'll do it.
And just further to that, have you created or used digital perhaps, or created an educational program for bud tenders for your product, like leading up to this? Yeah,
that's definitely one of the tactics that we are going to be doing. There's several channels in advertising for cannabis companies. Not only are we trying to reach the consumer and learn more about them and try to adopt them, but we have an army of bud tenders and retailers out there that we don't know yet. We don't know how to get to them yet. So that's a whole other channel. And then, of course, we have the government channels as well to have those relationships. So it's a lot of talking to different people and trying to find out where they are and say the right thing.
And how much do you look to bigger LPs to sort of push the boundaries and be a little more bleeding edge? Because it is tougher for a smaller LP to say, I'm going to plaster my logo everywhere with Mad Canada and just see what happens. Because they can deal with that $5 million fine. By the way, that's what the max is penalty for doing that if they didn't get away with it.
You have to have a really good lawyer, and you have to all sit down together as a management team and decide what your risk tolerance is. And to go to market and to be in cannabis, I think you got to take some risk. I was walking home the other day and I took a picture of this campaign at 420 that Kronos Spinach did with Arrive Alive and Foodora, and I sent it to our lawyer. I'm like, how the hell is this possible? you know? And she said, you know, it was just really clever. And she outlined exactly the whole strategy of how it was done. And I was thinking, oh my God, I have to think so much smarter. Like I just don't think this way. But I think there's a balance to it too. I think, you know, do you want to be mischievous and misleading and kind of not up front just to be able to get your name out? Like, how do you want to show up, right? And so I think it is a balance. So yeah, I'm happy to see those guys take risks. I think they need to, and I think they're in a position where, you know, they damn well better. They have a lot of money, and they're going to be the icebreakers for all of us.
Yeah, and you know, from that perspective, you said something really interesting there that we're faced with as well. Every time somebody suggests something, all my designers do work in this space. We present it to the client. The first thing they say is, "Oh, I love that. We have to check with compliance." Is what they say. And there are some great ideas and innovation and design happening, but again, it depends on your risk tolerance. And you know, as much as there are millions of dollars being dumped into advertising and analytics and trying to gain market share, a lot of that is so risk averse that it may not get anywhere. Charles, over to you about that as well. You know, the restrictive advertising laws, different types of limitations. What have you picked up on all this that you want to share with us?
I guess it's a double-edged sword because that also opens the door for a lot of really creative thinking, as long as you're not slimy about it. But there's a way. So one of our clients, they came to us and they said, well, we have these challenges. We're dealing with the Bill C-45. And they were actually one of the more conservative cannabis LPs. So they weren't taking the same kind of risks. And they said, well, we want to show our customers in certain ways from the education side. So how can we educate them? One thing that we did was, and also you can't just go and see their facility. They had one of the earliest and most high-tech facilities built, but you can't just go there. You gotta wear the Breaking Bad outfit.
You gotta suit up and,
and
they check your ID.
They don't just want people wandering through. You know, the 2D videos are fine, but also 2D videos that get circulated on the internet, not so fine. So we filmed a virtual reality of their facility. And it was a big hit in the way that, well, it was purely educational. They talked about their process, their commitment to quality. So they sort of brand themselves as a higher level quality. And, you know, their oils are award winning. Actually, I can say it's CannTrust. So you can see the facility in the back.
They're over there.
I was like, can I say this? Yes. And it was a big hit, not only to show and to educate the consumer, but then they realized, well, this is, our own staff don't even know what goes on back here. Our front office has never been to this facility, which is in Niagara, and we don't necessarily want to send them there. And now we're growing our team out. Now we can hear from the head grower everything. At the core of this is the product and how the product is made and how it's produced and all the details that goes into that. And so we shot this in virtual reality, and now it's been used for marketing, for investor relations, for training, for HR, and now everybody that joins the company sees it. Plus on the B2C side, now people can see that facility, and it really does resonate with them, not only because the medium is so powerful, but also because they can see something that they never have seen before. People take the headset off, they're like, I never knew this is what it was like. And it really speaks to them, speaks to their brand.
The first time you see a mother tree, your mind is blown. I don't know if have you been to tours?
Oh, I've toured almost every facility across this country.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're pretty fascinating.
It's really fascinating. But you're saying that you created a virtual but fake environment?
No, it's real.
It's real.
You just capture the real environment.
How are you able to show that to consumers?
Well, first of all, if it's a headset, so when we have
it's a closed situation. It's
closed
not on the
situation,
internet.
yeah. So we originally unveiled it at Lyft last year, and they gave me some socks, and it was a big hit. And you know, we always knew the utility of digital products is more than just the fluffiness behind it. You know, it is a great medium for learning. It's a great medium for education, for retaining of information. So yeah, they have it on certain. CannTrust ended up buying 60 headsets, and they're going to buy a bunch more, and they use it for their sales reps. So sales reps are now the people on the other end buying the government entities, depending on the province. They're they're not experts in cannabis either, and they're trying to figure out ways to differentiate from all the LPs and all the sales guys coming in there too. So one of the powerful sales tools that the CannTrust guys have is a virtual reality tour of their facility. And we did this before. The VP of marketing from CannTrust had come over from Mill Street, and we had done the same thing for Mill Street Brewery, because they also have their main breweries in Scarborough, and they don't let anybody go there. They go to the touristy location in the old town, but in the distillery, but that's not actually where they brew the beer. So, it's just sort of
it's a front.
Yeah. Although everybody thinks that's where they brew the beer.
I live in Scarborough, so I know they don't brew it down there. Let's stay with you, Charles, because I want to know where you're going next with by leveraging technology. You talked about VR. I think there's personally, I've been discussing AR with a number of clients in this space because that's a gated environment, right? If you're doing it on your phone, you're looking at some sort of QR code or something, you can get more information. Kirsten, you know how restrictive packaging laws are for your product. You can't really talk about anything about your product. You can't put an insert in the box. You can't tell them anything about your brand. It's your logo in a certain amount of pixels on a product. That's it. What are you looking at to help with that?
Yeah, so that's annoying, but we're saying, image recognition. So we're bringing our toolbox to this space, and we're saying, you can use your phone and identify a product and bring up information and pull information and speak to its values, because people, you need a value proposition more than just the flower, right? So it's saying, well, this is how this is information that you will need. It's funny because on the one side, they want to educate. On the other side, they're like, but don't educate on the thing that they're buying. Educate anywhere else, but also but at least with the phone. And then when you make it digital as well too, the ability to gather data and to understand your consumer more, and also for your consumer to be empowered by it, because there are so many products and it's mind blowing. I guess it's a bit of a pun.
Only if it's psychoactive, high THC content. Kirsten, how are you leveraging technology, or what are you considering in the future, further to what we were just talking about with Charles here?
Well, definitely, I think there's a lot of opportunity with in-store activation and augmented reality. We're going to be probably weighing very heavily on that for education in the future, if regulations don't change. Really, we're concentrating, like I said before, is building out this CRM platform and really understanding our customer the most. Probably leveraging more technology from existing industries out there. I think we're kind of behind as a whole. We're starting from nothing and trying to catch up and moving at light speed. I'm also sad that we're going to miss the in-between stage of small companies and niche products. I don't want it to be mass, but so nothing that we haven't already spoken about before in this panel. It's just trying to keep up.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because there's this massive M&A thing that's happening that I think we've already spoken about. But that also happened in beer and alcohol, and then there was a renaissance of craft over the last 15, 20 years.
Yeah, I think that, what we're seeing right now with metrics, so we're seeing the price of cannabis being driven down. This is one of the reasons why we're doing the farm. We're going to be able to pull, gram off for pennies, whereas, we're still growing at $2 and some a gram. So there's just no room for the micro growers to make money. And I am a bit concerned about that, because they are starting to issue a lot of those licenses. And it's really a race to the bottom now, and it's become a commodity. And especially with second generation products, which we're tracking based on the US data, that these are the future. Obviously, people are smoking less, and we want to consume in different ways and not necessarily want to be stoned all the time. So we need cheaper inputs. So unfortunately, I do see it going big fast. And you know what? And then they'll have a renaissance, but I don't think it's today or tomorrow. I think we're just on too far of a track to get to that spot. And it's too bad.
Most most people predict a few years before we see the end of all this M&A, and then there being something a little more flat happening.
The hipsters will come back in with their, specialized.
Well, I think it's.
Well, I think some people will just always never buy legal weed or government weed that people are calling it now.
Well, you can grow 3 at home, right?
Yeah, that's a lot.
4? Yes,
That's
4.
why would you need to buy it?
But they can only be, for those who know and don't know, 3 feet high, 4 feet high. There's a certain height to these mother
Height
trees.
restrictions are in Quebec specifically.
Oh, okay, that's right.
if I
That's
remember
Quebec. See,
correctly.
it changes province to province. I can't even keep
changes all
up
the
with
time.
these regulations.
I'd like to know who comes and measures your plants, though.
The cannabis police.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I think you mentioned something really interesting about the commoditization and the price per gram, and I think because we're in such an infant industry, we can't get that price down, and I think we do have to scale our production up to keep the price lower, and it won't be selling dried flower that will be the future. A lot of people are predicting the future being the consumables, the concentrates, the topicals. Greg, what do you think about the future of the cannabis industry?
Yeah, I think especially when we're talking about edibles and extracts and even just some of the beauty products, I think we're going to see. And you have countries around the world that are kind of chomping at the bits to get into the Canadian market and offer their, penny per gram cannabis, like from Colombia, Jamaica, Mexico. They're trying to get in. Right now they can't. But I think there's going to be just a huge bulk of this commoditized cannabis. Probably wouldn't be something anyone would want to, roll up and smoke. And I think that dried flower sales, although it's a lower amount that we're seeing out of data coming out of the US, what people are buying, I think that's going to have to stay more of a premium product because the people that like to smoke dried flower like to smoke dried flower, and they like to smoke good dried flower, exactly. And whatever we put in our edibles, I think people will be okay with as long as it does what it needs to do. But if you want the taste and the flavors, especially from your novice to beginner cannabis user, you don't really care. But why I'm so interested in the vape pen you're coming out with, because someone who appreciates the terpenes and a lot of that are super cultivar specific, I'm fascinated by that, but I'm probably a minority. So it's
For now you're a minority, right? And I think that's one of the things that education is just not there yet anywhere. And that's been the biggest focus for us with every one of our clients in this space is, how do we educate so that people can get to the point where they appreciate those things, just like what wine has different flavors and tonalities to it. The same thing applies for the cannabis space.
Yeah, and some of the best work I've ever seen on educating in cannabis has actually come from some of your work in Newfoundland and just showing so much information about a cannabis product. And that's something that I think together we were really able to pitch to the governments as being the most important part of selling a product in this super regulated industry. It's you're going to want to tell them everything that's in it because that information exists. So why not show it? And yeah, for anyone who hasn't seen it, check out the Newfoundland website. It's
Thanks for the plug, Greg. I appreciate it. And over to you, Brandi. What does the future hold for your product innovation? Where are you pushing things that you can talk about, of course, because it's probably a little restrictive, but what's on your roadmap for product that involves cannabis?
Yeah, so we're really excited for EVO Skin Plus to hit the market as well. But because we can advertise and do all of those things, but we've done so in a very strategic way and have a very authentic brand that we hang on very tightly to, we won't go to market without the science behind that. And there's no published science right now to actually show the benefits of CBD or THC or cannabis on your skin. And so I hope I'm banking heavily that the science says that there's great benefits to it. But I truly believe that there is, but right now we're going through those kinds of trials and studies, leaning heavily on our partners at Aurora for those clinical studies. And so we're excited to get the science within that and then be able to develop products that are meaningful to the market from there, not just products that have cannabis in them because that's a buzz thing, but products that are actually going to benefit the consumer in that space. And what's really exciting for us within that and the future trajectory is that we can start now with educating the consumer that isn't, our consumer really, a lot of them are not interested in cannabis. And we can start that conversation in a safe place with them, leaning on Aurora, who can actually educate them in a meaningful way. So it's not us educating them, because we're still learning as well. We're going on that journey with the consumer, which makes it really exciting for us to be a part of it with them and for us to be the intermediate person between the non-consumer and the industry that's on this path. And so it's really exciting to be on that journey with the consumer prior to launching a product, while also undergoing science and being able to actually communicate that to the consumer. That makes it a much more safer place to play in with cannabis. So we're really excited to be that person who's kind of the in-between, and then to have product come to market that's meaningful to the consumer that currently still has a lot of those stigmas.
That's great. I'd love to turn over to the audience for some questions. We have a few minutes for that. If we have a mic ready to run around, if you have a question, raise your hand up high, and we'll have someone run a mic out to you in the crowd. Over here on the right-hand side. Someone over there already, yes.
Hi, thank you very much for the panel. I just kind of wanted to go back to this idea about craft and sort of craft in the digital turn, perhaps, and the what the digital turn means for craft. And there's so many comparisons you're making between industries such as wine and beer, and those industries have had like literally maybe thousands of years, but historically, we've known about them for hundreds of years. And there has been hundreds of years put into the craft of, say, cannabis or other pharmaceuticals, that sort of thing. But because we haven't really discussed it, particularly in North American culture, that's been really underground. So I'm just wondering about kind of, and you all talk about this escalation, this sort of like, whoosh, we're going to just do it kind of thing. And so I just wanted you to talk a little bit about what time does for an industry like a cannabis industry. Yeah.
I'll start.
Kirsten, yeah.
So I really like your question, because I think we all have to remember that this was a plant that was highly restricted. Basically, we were all taught it was a narcotic and that you would go to jail if you were caught with it. And there's immense unlearning that needs to happen around that. And with the restrictions that we're seeing right now, that's been very difficult for us as LPs to do, because it's considered promotion. So unfortunately, at the speed with which we're traveling, we're losing out on having a lot of conversations that are meaningful. And I'm hoping that other people and bodies will insert themselves and start to have those, or even ourselves as a community, a cannabis community needs to come in and start having those conversations. Craft is a huge part of cannabis. I mean, there are over, what they say, there are over 1,000 strains, but we know there are more than 1,000 strains. They all kind of do different things. They all can affect us in lots of different ways. A lot of people don't even know what cannabinoids are and how many there are, and we don't even know that. So, anyone else want to talk about it?
Greg, yeah. Did you want to address that? Sorry, Charles. I know Greg was chomping at the bit for that.
I'm always jumping to say something about something. Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on really something interesting there with the genetic side of things. What we have in terms of genetics in Canada is such a small subset of what exists around the world. And my hope for craft in the future is really going to come around to, you know, can they start bringing in new genetics, and can they start, you know, creating in these small, very controlled environments, potentially something we may have never seen before, and innovate on that idea. And the adoption for craft licenses in Canada has been relatively small compared to what they were hoping for. They haven't issued any yet. It's something I stay very close to, because it's something that I've always wanted to do, is start like a craft facility. So it's definitely I'm hoping to become a big part of our cannabis industry here in Canada. We're already seeing some of the larger LPs come in and try and sort of create co-ops of all these smaller micro grows, exactly. And we'll see what that does, because that could be a really great avenue into some of the larger provincial distribution channels that require thousands and thousands of grams per order. So I'm hoping in the next, I'd say realistically by the end of next year, we should start seeing craft grows in our retail stores.
I mean, craft in general has had a resurgence in everything lately, Queen West. And so it remains to be seen. I mean, even if the flower itself, the Afrias of the world trying to just get it down as cheap as they can, there'll always be a market, and we'll wait to see how fast that evolves. And there's also the opportunity for craft of derivative products as well. So if you are putting it into if you are making it into a beverage or a craft chocolate with cannabis in it, and that chocolate is very, very bespoke.
It would be called artisanal.
Artisanal, that's the word.
At that point, by the way.
Yeah.
I think also there's something, like we're talking a lot about the grow. I think that, so we're talking a lot about grow and the scientific and the ad and regulations to it. But if you look at places like California, where their laws are very different, or even look at some of the precedents from other industries, like for example, do you know who grows the tomatoes in Heinz ketchup, or do you know Heinz ketchup?
Leamington farmers.
You do? Oh, well,
Formerly.
you are just a
Formerly.
wealth of knowledge, but not everybody knows that. Or Lay's potato chips. Lay's potato chips, but you know Lay's. And so I think that really the brands are going to be who holds that power and who ultimately also decides what's craft and what isn't. It's brand positioning, I think, on a lot of that. And California is a really good precedence for that in the cannabis space right now too. I've invested in other cannabis companies and have stayed very focused in investment in the United States because the regulations are so heavily different, and also because I really bank on brands. I think that all businesses, no matter what industry it is a human-to-human connection that results in a transaction, and often those human-to-human connections are one human to the brand, which is the human in which they engage in as the business counterpart. And so I think that the brands are going to be the ones that kind of hold that space. And so and it's a lot easier for a craft brand to really hold that authenticity and have that relationship with the consumer. And then that's where craft becomes super important, especially in an industry that requires so much education. And you want to go to be educated by somebody that you trust. And sometimes, like, for example, in the beauty space, sometimes you don't trust Procter & Gamble as the green beauty space is growing. Or sometimes you don't trust those bigger guys because they've done things in the past that you didn't necessarily align with value base. But the craft ones, you know and can trust their values. But that's a brand positioning, not so much a grow positioning in a lot of ways.
Craig, didn't Afria buy the Leamington factories for Heinz ketchup?
I think they have like a 1.2 million square foot facility there.
Right.
But when you drive up to the facility, it's as far as the eye could see in any direction, it's all tomatoes.
Yeah.
It's probably the most insane thing I've ever seen.
Right.
That was is the weirdest fact that I know that.
And of course you knew that. You're a wealth of knowledge.
But that's where the production facility was until Afria purchased their factories. They were just growing in every direction, of course. Question over here.
So I just wanted to know about the Colorado 5-year report that came out. It was greatly positive, I believe. How do you guys look at it, and what are its future, possibilities with respect to your brands?
I missed the question. Look, can you repeat the question, please? Hang on to the microphone.
Yeah, the Colorado 5-year, they actually, because they legalized weed in Colorado, they had a 5-year study about how it really affected society. It was greatly positive in a way, but they did have problems with staying high and driving. So there are around 28 deaths, but that's comparatively lesser than drinking. So how do you guys look at the report, and is there anything that you know of it? That's all.
So, sorry, is your question about, you going to understand the question? It's about, are you talking about the Tweed partnership with Mad Canada and the promotion of that?
No, it's okay, never mind.
Like how cannabis affects society?
Society, yeah.
Yeah.
And how are you looking at it? And what are its effects? And is there a really need to be worried that way? Because it's been positive.
Yeah.
Because the FIRE report is actually positive in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you have a great positive effect analysis of this in your scientific plan, do you not?
Yeah, that, but then also more from like a societal perspective. So I can only speak to it from the statistics that I know. And I don't know any statistics actually based on cannabis relative to this, but our company is very focused on domestic violence and those kinds of things. And I think that it's really interesting. It's actually a conversation that comes up quite a bit about how cannabis affects society, and it's a very torn opinion. Some people think that it's awful and crime rates and it's a gateway drug, and those are like what Kirsten was talking about. Those are kind of the stigmas and those things for us to unlearn. EVO is really focused on making a change in society, particular to domestic violence and the way that we look at homelessness and just society in general. We talk about this a lot and have a lot of controversial conversations or conversations that are uncomfortable to people, especially on our EVO community platform. And I think that cannabis has a role to play in that, in bettering society. And the reason why I say that is, and even from an economic point of view, we're spending $3 billion a year on domestic violence, for example. A lot of that domestic violence is relative to mental health challenges and also to alcohol. And those are two things that cannabis has direct effects on: mental health and reducing the use of alcohol. I believe that you guys might be able to speak to, I feel like you know more statistics on that in particular, but I think that's a huge benefit to society to actually be able to reduce addiction. Cannabis is proven to be able to do that, which is a huge play in negative effects of society. And yeah, I think that it actually, given time, because all of these things don't change overnight, cannabis isn't legalized and then all of a sudden our streets are drug-free and addiction-free and all of these things. It's going to take time, but I think that it's a step in the right direction, actually having cannabis something that's more accessible to society.
Greg, I just want to say one thing before you go on your rant, because I know you're going to go on a good rant here. Let's keep in mind this panel isn't education in cannabis. We could do a whole other hour and a half on education in cannabis. There have been, when I was onboarded into this industry, part of my teaching by, I forget the guy's name, you probably remember the guy's name, was that no one has died from cannabis, okay, in recorded history, and cannabis is less addictive than coffee. And I'll pass over to Greg for some of the other statements that you probably are going to say.
So I think you were referencing a specific report in Colorado, is that right? I haven't read it. I will, I promise. But right now, I find a lot of what's being passed around as the benefits of Canada, for the most part, anecdotal. Colorado being one of the longer standing legalized markets, we're starting to see now some reports, so that makes sense that they're starting to make some generalizations about, here are the positive effects. I think we're still a few years away, because that's been kind of an ongoing subtopic, is that the data just isn't quite there in the industry yet to be, I'm 100% sure this is how it's going. And, with a lot of companies doing clinical trials, like we're starting to see really good stuff come out, specifically out of Israel. I know they're like 20 years ahead of us, but yeah, it's I mean, personally, I'm, of the belief that cannabis is a good thing and better than any of the other drugs we take, like alcohol and coffee, sugar, for example. One thing that I'll note is that there's a really great study going on right now out of UBC, West Coast, talking about cannabis to treat the opioid crisis, which is something I'm super passionate about and I'm hoping to see some real results out of soon. But yeah, I think for the most part, what we see now is mostly anecdotal.
I think we have time for one more question if there's any in the crowd. Nigel Newton.
Hi, you've mentioned about the cultural shifts and the stigmas and the challenges that you've had. How much, in order to achieve the anticipated trajectory of consumer growth, do you need to see consumer adoption, and at what rate?
Well, I wish I had the real numbers for that. I think a lot of it in this industry is sort of like balancing facts with feelings. A lot of people have never spoken about their cannabis use before. A lot of people are starting to. They're not comfortable about it. So I would say, I don't even know how to answer that question. I don't.
It's anecdotal, I guess.
It's a loaded question.
It's tough, right? Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off.
I would never talk to my parents about cannabis, and now I kind of have to. But then they told me, my mom told me that she was using a doses to help sleep. So it's awkward, and it's sort of like something that has been around. The funny thing about cannabis is there's been a lot of people, if the joke was if you were white, cannabis has been legal for 30 years. So now they're just discovering new products and new ways and new ways to use it on the health side. But it's coming where, and the stigmas are there, but they are breaking. And it's interesting. You see normal people in different industries who are working in them. You go on LinkedIn and you're like, oh, my friend worked at a bank last week. Now he's working in an LP. How about that? Well, somebody's buying these products. So, the industry is big and there's people working in it because there's money coming in. So at some point, it's like thinking about your parents having sex. It's like it happened at least once. So we're going to keep talking about it, and it is changing.
Yeah, I would say too, we do know that the fastest growing segment are the 50 plus. I mean, they were early adopters. They're coming back to cannabis, and they want to take it in new ways. They're very open-minded to it. They're not afraid. And everyone's trying to live a more healthful life, and smoking is not cool anymore, and drinking is really on the decline, and people want different experiences, and the opioid crisis is really sort of making people think twice about doing that. So we've always taken something. Oh.
Yeah.
We did sorry.
No.
We did a study last year, actually in April 2018, so almost exactly a year ago, with Sephora. So we were part of the Sephora Accelerate program, and we asked 2,000 of their customers. We asked a ton of questions about cannabis and beauty. And it was interesting that 26% of the people on this survey worked in the medical field. And so keeping that in mind, this was also 96% of these consumers were in the US, so only 4% in Canada, and all of them heavily educated. And it was interesting actually when we asked what comes to mind when you hear the word cannabis, many in which didn't even know what cannabis was at that time. So some said sounds like cannibal. Some said drug, some said bad. The whole census of it was that very few people had good things to say. And when we asked them if they wanted to see cannabis in their products, it was very much a no-go. Over 76% said no way. And so the stigma was very heavy. This was just April of last year. We haven't redone that survey, but just now from the consensus of it, I mean, Sephora has launched cannabis products, hemp-based products, but with a heavy focus that this is a cannabis derivative on their shelves, and it's selling. So that goes to show that those numbers have definitely changed. It would be interesting to redo that. Being in a market that isn't cannabis focused, I think we have really good gauge kind of on where that needle is moving, because it was very much over here, and now people are starting to buy it, so we know that it's moving. So it'd be interesting to redo that kind of survey. But just a year ago, it was very low, but that needle is moving quickly. Yeah.
And it's funny that you ask it today. Yesterday, just up the street, there's actually an event called Breaking the Stigma, A History of Hash, that I regrettably couldn't go to. But there's a lot of groups and companies out there that have social awareness programs. It all falls down to education. I mean, My mom to this day will swear up and down that medical cannabis is different than recreational cannabis. It's the same product, moving towards the same packaging, but will swear all day. She worked in a doctor's office, she knows better. So, okay, of course, Mom. So it comes down to education at the end of the day. It's gonna take some time. I mean, we went from, cannabis is a drug, cannabis is bad, to, okay, cannabis is now legal in such a short amount of time. And never in the history has something like that happened. So it's going to take time, it's gonna take a long time, but eventually we'll get there, and yeah, I'm excited for when we do.
And I have one just final thing to say about that specifically, Nigel, is that when the OCS had a plan to open retail, there were a lot of objections from groups around the province. I don't want my store here, I don't want a store here, I don't want one in my community. You dial that forward 6 months in January when all the city councils around the province had to vote on whether they were okay with a store opening in their communities. The urban centers were actually the most challenging. It's the rural and suburban centers that said unanimous yeses to most of these decisions. So it just proves that people are becoming a little bit more open to this. They are becoming more educated, and there's always going to be a divide in urban centers no matter what. I think we all know that in politics as well. But just provincially, there's just been a huge change in education and awareness that we showed just in that example. One more, I just want to give everyone a quick round of applause and thank you for joining the panel. And I want to give you guys one quick plug opportunity. Where can we find you online? What are you doing? Or tell us about an event you're doing, and then we'll wrap things up, starting with you, Charles.
You can check out some of our work back there, xrcanna.com, which we launched 2 weeks ago. Oh, we launched on 420. I should know this. And then patiointeractive.com for the more design-oriented and digital solutions. So we're going to be at Collision as well. So we're building out our immersive learning platform for cannabis, and it's going to be really cool to learn about all that interesting stuff. Education, obviously a big theme here. So, and we're using the latest and the coolest technology to do it, so people can really absorb it, and helping the teachers become better teachers.
Charles, over to you, Kirsten.
Well, you can check out 48north.com, NRTH, and also check out Explore Latitude. That's our platform that is our stigma-busting platform that tells stories of women and how they use cannabis. It really speaks to being sort of the first out to talk openly about that. Women do consume in different ways than men and are often highly stigmatized for that. So sign up and you'll learn more about us. ExploreLatitude.com.
Greg?
ampleorganics.com or at Gorzkowski on Twitter. You can follow me. That's where I am all the time. And yeah, you can normally.
Where are you speaking next, Greg?
Where am I speaking next? In Expo Cannabis in Cartagena, Colombia.
Wonderful. And will we see you at Lift in next month as well?
Be at Lift.
Expo.
I'll probably be roaming Cannabis tomorrow, so I'm around. I'm most places.
And last but not least, Brandi.
Yeah.
Tell us about you.
So you can find us at eviobeauty.com, and also Carol and Shabby are here in the EVO sweaters handing out EVO credit cards where you can redeem free products too, and our website, all the information's on there as well. Yeah.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, everyone. Round of applause again.
Thanks, Matt. It's been a long day for you.